Sterling Cousins. I'm I'm sure you know what time it is. You already know what time it is. In a minute, horror stories. In a minute, horror stories. Mm. That's all I'm gonna say. Where are we at today? SNG's house, our good stolen cousins. Duh. Um, Obviously go over there, subscribe. Please make yourself familiar. Hop in the comments, watch the videos, everything you need to do over there. Do the same over here, but if you haven't done the same over there, please do. If you are one of those that complain in the comments, the channel says elephant chatting. Elephant chatting, okay? I, who love elephants, will be chatting. Come on now. If you want to watch the animated videos by yourself, go over to one of these pages. They are in the comments below. Come on now. Descriptions below. Everything below. Go there. As of now, you're here with me. I love you. Thank you. I appreciate you so much. What are we watching today? 3 Psycho Roommate Horror Stories animated. Please grab a blunt, grab a bottle of water, grab a blankets, and grab a bag of chips in case you want a snack. Okay? Okay? FSG, whatever you want.
Don't you think the idea of having a roommate is strange? I mean, it's one thing when your roommates are friends or college roommates, but it's another thing when they are strangers. I have a story with my old roommate, a story that made me never trust strangers again. Everyone has their dark secrets, and Lucas was no exception. Although his secret was much darker than any other roommate I might have had. It all started when I decided to move into a new apartment. I urgently needed a place to stay, as my lease was not renewed in my previous apartment. Searching online, I came across an apartment that caught my attention. The rent was cheap and the place looked decent. The person who placed the ad needed to share the rent with someone, and the owner of the place seemed to be okay with that. So I told him in the interview that I would like to live with him. Lucas seemed like a quiet, hardworking, and quite serious person. The first few days were pretty normal. Lucas worked a night shift, so I didn't see him much. I had a regular office job, so I spent most of the day outside. We would cross paths occasionally and talk a little, but for the most part, we each had our own space and time. I think one of the things that attracted me the most to this apartment was the fact that even though I lived with someone, we had separate rooms, so I could feel like I was living alone even when I was with someone. One night, while I was watching TV, I heard a noise in Lucas's room. I didn't think much of it at first, thinking he had come home early from work or something. However, the noise started to go on for quite a while, and a few minutes later, it started to worry me. I knocked on the door but got no answer. I decided to open it a little and peek in. The room was dark, but I could see Lucas sitting on the floor with his legs crossed and mumbling something I didn't understand. I stared at him for a moment, trying to figure out what he was doing. Finally, I decided to call out to him. "Lucas, are you okay?" He stopped immediately and raised his head to look at me. His eyes were wild and quite lost. He strangely smiled at me and said, "Yes, I was just meditating." What he said made sense. After all, he was sitting on the floor in the dark, but something didn't quite convince me. If he was meditating, why was he making so much noise? Shouldn't it be the other way around? I had my doubts, but I decided not to insist anyway. Whatever he was doing was his business, and I had no reason to interfere. I closed the door and went back to the living room a little restless. I had a hard time sleeping that night, but I finally managed to fall asleep. The next day, Lucas behaved normally. We talked a bit about life stuff, like our work and love life, and then I went to work. However, that uncomfortable feeling wouldn't go away. I started noticing strange things in the apartment. A while after he came home from work, I could see him turning the lights on and off all the time. I would hear noises in the night, like someone walking down the hallway. Every time I asked Lucas if he had noticed anything, he said no, that it was probably my imagination. You can imagine how suspicious I found that answer, because if they told me they saw lights and heard footsteps at night, they would at least be concerned. One night while I was lying down, I heard a loud knock coming from Lucas's room. I jumped out of bed and ran to his door. I knocked several times, but there was no answer. I swear I could hear noises from in there, like babbling or scratching, but the door was still locked. And if I got in without Lucas's permission and turned out to be wrong, I could be in trouble with him. After a few minutes, I decided to go in without his permission. As I told you before, he always keeps the door locked, but not that time. He was in the house, but that day he told me he was a little sick from the food, so he had long periods where he would go to the bathroom and take a long time to come out. At all those times, I saw him lock the door, which made me even more curious. I told him I was going to sleep so he would let his guard down a little more, and surprisingly, it worked. Lucas went to the bathroom and left the door to his room closed, but unlocked. I took advantage of that moment to rush to his room. I had no idea what I might run into, but I knew it would just be a quick peek to get any doubts out of my mind, and then I would go to sleep for real. I slowly approached the room as soon as I heard the door to his bathroom, and once I opened it, what I saw left me cold. The place was a mess. There were strange symbols drawn on the walls and floor, unlit red candles, and the remains of what looked like small dead animals. My heart was pounding. I felt a cold chill run down my back. Suddenly, I heard a small babbling sound coming from a corner of the room. A woman. A person was bound and gagged. She seemed to be injured and quite malnourished. Had she been in here a long time? Then how come I never heard her while Lucas was gone?
You have.
Did he leave her drugged before he left?
He did.
I didn't know what to do. Should I confront Lucas?
No.
No, that seemed like a terrible idea. The right thing to do was to call the police. I closed the door and slowly went to my room, but suddenly I felt dizzy. My blood pressure was dropping. I sat in the living room on my way to my room, trying to stay calm, but my mind kept imagining all kinds of horrible scenarios. I had to get out of there as soon as possible, but I couldn't get up because I was so dizzy. My own body was betraying me. Finally, I heard the bathroom door open. Lucas walked with a calm expression on his face. When he saw me sitting up and scared, his smile disappeared. "What are you doing awake? Are you okay? You're white." "No, nothing. I'm fine. I just...
Feel sick.
I couldn't sleep, and my blood pressure got a little low." Lucas sighed and closed the door behind him. He walked towards me with an eerie calmness. "Hey, that's terrible. Take a deep breath. You can do it with me on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Keep your eyes open.
You never struck me as one of those people with tachycardia. Has something made you upset? No, just a family problem. I'll tell you tomorrow. Now I'd like to go to bed." As soon as I said that, I got up and nervously went to bed. Lucas stood there looking at me somewhat confused. I went into my room ready to call the police, but Lucas opened the door immediately and found me with the phone to my ear.
Say, hey,
"I'm sorry
Mom,
to come in
how you
unannounced. I was
doing?"
just worried about you." As soon as I came in, I cut the call as soon as possible, but Lucas not only noticed this, but he also had the phone to his ear. "Thank you, but I'm better. I just need to sleep." Speaking of which, I thought you were going to sleep. Who are you calling?
My mother.
My family. I'm a bit worried about what I wanted to talk to you about tomorrow. I understand. Don't let my presence prevent you from making the call. It must be important. Make it.
Okay. Get out
Don't.
of my room.
I better not. It's already late. I'd rather go to sleep. I was a little reckless and exaggerated. I'm sorry. It's
12
okay.
usually calls back.
Get better. I'll go to my room. Knock on the door if you need me. Okay?
Fast.
Yes.
Okay, get
yes,
out of my
of
room,
course.
Lucas.
As soon as he closed the door, life came back to my body. I was convinced that Lucas had discovered me. I had to get out of that place and call the police as soon as possible. Every second I spent in that apartment, my life was in danger. Just to make sure Lucas was far away, I slowly approached the door and looked through the hole. Never lie to a liar. You were in my room, weren't you?
No.
Do you think I'd leave the door open without knowing you could come in? Do you think I'm an amateur?
Just lay
Lucas
down.
put his
Why
hands on my
didn't you
neck
lay
and
down?
held me tightly. He was using so much force, I thought he was going to break my neck. I was
could.
losing my breath. I needed to do something or I would die. I grabbed the cell phone I had dropped with Lucas's
with it.
tackle and slammed it as hard as I could into his head.
Facts.
That seemed to stun him for a few seconds,
Run.
which I used to escape from the apartment. I ran to the elevator, but it wasn't on our floor. Behind me, I heard Lucas run up to where I was.
keep going.
I turned away from the elevator and ran
Hit
down
the
the stairs,
stairs.
running as
Back.
fast as I could. Behind me, Lucas seemed to be catching up. He wasn't even stepping on the steps, but jumping them to the floor.
No.
I felt he was about to catch me. There was no way I could have put the key in the door without him catching me first. When I got to the top floor, I ran for the door, but Lucas was no longer chasing me. I heard some babbling on the stairs upstairs, and when I climbed the stairs, I joined other neighbors, and we were all shocked at what we saw.
Just hurry up.
Lucas was at the bottom of the stairs on the second floor. His whole body was bleeding, and he appeared to be having difficulty
way.
breathing.
How?
Lucas had stepped wrong and fallen down the stairs, breaking many bones and his neck. The neighbors called the ambulance immediately, and I called the police. When they entered the house, they found the girl gagged and tied up and released her. The girl burst into tears of joy and fear, and another ambulance took her to the hospital. Soon after I understood what happened, Lucas was not renting that place but had murdered the owners and kidnapped the daughter to torture her. Since he had very little money, he had to pretend he was renting the place so that I would give him money to pay for utilities and food. I'm sure there were other ways to get money, but I do not doubt that the situation of living with me while another person was gagged in his room filled him with morbidity. As I suspected, the girl remained drugged while he left the house. The girl confessed that he told her that he was not going to work but to stalk another girl to replace her, as he was getting bored and considered it was time to kill her. Because of all this, you would imagine that Lucas would have spent a lot of time in jail. You are wrong. Lucas died in that staircase accident. He never got to pay for what he did. Today, I still live in that house. Life and experience made me and the kidnapped girl become great friends, and then a couple.
Okay.
I know that nothing can erase that horrible experience she had,
bonding.
but at least with me, she can share it.
Yeah, trauma bonding.
Hello, I'm Al, or at least I think so. I'm very confused. I'm having a hard time telling this story, but I'm having an even harder time knowing how much of what I'm telling happened. I used to be a normal person. I lived in the same apartment all my life, a very central apartment close to the university. I used to live with my parents in that apartment, but something happened. My parents were involved with the wrong people, and they died when some men broke into our house.
What?
I hid under the bed and didn't see anything. After the criminals left, some neighbors found me and took me away. I was very little and barely understood what was going on, and I will be grateful for that for the rest of my life. After that, I went to live with my aunt and uncle, who took care of me as best as they could. The men were never caught, and I understand that they never will be, but I don't care about that anymore. As ugly and hopeless as it sounds, I moved on and continued to live my life as best I could. As traumatizing as it sounds and as good a story as that would be, I am not here to talk about my childhood, but about something that happened very recently. It all started when I turned 21. That was the moment when I decided that I was an adult and that I was ready to fend for myself. I thanked my aunt and uncle for everything they did for me and went back to the apartment where it all happened, ready to live on my own. I applied to the college across the street, and now I only needed one thing to live there: a roommate. You see, for the moment I had a lot of money saved and I could survive in that apartment without any problem, but anyway, an extra income while I was looking for a job would come in handy. Besides, I must admit that I was a little afraid to stay alone in that apartment. I needed someone new to change the energy of the place. It was then that, after placing an ad and letting some time pass, I met Ralph. Ralph was a striking man. He was about 10 years older than me, but even so, he also had a very low profile. He didn't like to go out much, he just wanted the apartment to study and concentrate as much as possible. I told him that once in a while I could have a party or play loud music, but he told me that it didn't bother him and that he would just put his headphones on and go about his life. To tell you the truth, I lied. I didn't have any friends, and I wasn't a person who would have a party, much less in his apartment, but I needed to test Ralph, and to my surprise, he passed all the tests I gave him. He was a perfect person to live with, or at least that's what I thought at the moment I called him to tell him to come and live in my apartment. At first, it was everything just as he said it would be. Ralph was very reserved, he spent all his time studying, locked in his own world. It was almost like living alone. He didn't do much more than study. I didn't even see him eat, and I couldn't see him sleep much either. Every time I invited him to eat, he would tell me that he didn't want to waste time since he had to read for an exam that was always coming up. His bed was always empty, except for a couple of exceptions when he would go to bed, but even then I felt like he was looking at me, like he was only doing it because I suspected something about him. The rest of the days, things got worse. There wasn't a day that went by that I felt uncomfortable with Ralph. He was watching me at all times, judging me from his desk seat. I felt like he spent more time watching me than looking at his notes. Every time I asked him if something was wrong, he would look at me in confusion and deny everything. Was I the only one going crazy? No, it doesn't make sense. I've never had anything like this happen to me before. It was probably Ralph. Although, I had never lived with anyone except my parents or aunts and uncles. I tried to get used to Ralph. I supposed that living with a stranger might bring this kind of thing, and that he probably also put up with a lot of things from me. Until one day, it all got out of control. What? That night, I was sleeping. I had a difficult exam the next day, and I wanted to sleep as much as I could to continue studying in the morning. Ralph's study method didn't work for me, as I needed several hours of sleep to be able to perform better on the exam. That night, my roommate was still studying. The door to our room was closed, but a little light from Ralph's desk was coming in from under the door. I fell asleep quickly. I tried to memorize some possible test questions, and before I knew it, my eyes had closed in bed. I
Ralph on
fell
top
asleep
again?
very relaxed, but when I woke up a few hours later, everything had changed. It was completely dark. The light was no longer coming from under the door, so Ralph was no longer studying. I turned and looked at his bed, thinking I would find him asleep, but that didn't happen either. His bed was empty. I was a little surprised, thinking maybe he went outside to get some air, but when I looked over, all that curiosity turned to terror. Ralph was standing in front of me, watching me sleep.
Ooh, I knew it.
His face was not the same as usual. It was terrifying. At first, I thought his eyes were looking up, but on closer inspection, I realized they weren't. They were completely white. His body was convulsing, but he was perfectly upright. Ralph, are you okay? He didn't answer me. He just stood there in front of me. After thinking rationally for a few seconds, I realized that I shouldn't be afraid. My roommate was probably a sleepwalker.
No,
That would have
he's not.
explained why I often didn't see him in bed or why he didn't like to sleep. I tried to get up to help him back to bed, but my body barely moved. Ralph walked quickly to my side. His walk was strange. It was too
Get
fast
up,
to be that of a
fight.
sleepwalker, and I could tell he reacted very quickly to my movement. I started to get scared again. What are you doing? Why are you so close to me?
He's gonna kill you.
Hide. They are coming. They're coming for us. What are you talking
Get
about?
up.
Who's coming for us? Have you
Boy.
gone crazy?
Yes.
Run! Run now! I had no idea what was happening, but I had to get away
Oh.
from this man as fast as possible. I
Hurry
got out
up.
of bed and left the room. I ran as fast as I could to the front door.
'Cause he
Something
said
was wrong.
that.
The key turned, but the door wouldn't open. Was I locked in?
Yes.
I turned
then
around
I
looking for
didn't
Ralph,
take
but
it
he
out
was
of the
gone.
house.
The door to the room was still open, but there was no
Hiding.
one inside. Ralph was gone. Had he gone into
Hiding.
hiding? I didn't think he had
He
jumped out of
told
the
you
window.
to hide.
What was happening to him? I didn't let that distraction take me out of focus. I had to get out of that place as soon as possible. I turned the door handle again. Now it was unlocked.
Okay.
The door was opening. As
Okay.
soon as I opened the door, someone was
Oh.
waiting for me behind it. It was Ralph.
No
I saw
way.
him. He jumped on top of me. Something else had changed in him. Blood was
Ralph, get
coming out of his
off him.
mouth. He grabbed my face as hard as he could, moving my skin from side to side, hurting me and filling my face with blood.
Get off
Hide!
him.
You have to hide! I pushed him as hard as I could and started running. I ran away from that building as fast as I could.
No,
I didn't know
wait.
what had happened to Ralph, but I didn't want to stick around and check. When I got out of the building, I kept running until I saw a big light coming towards me,
Don't
and after
stop.
that, it was
the
all a
first one.
blur. When I woke up, I was in a hospital. My whole
Okay.
body hurt. Those lights, that was a van. I had been in a traffic accident. I stood up with difficulty and went to the door, but the door was locked. I had been in hospitals before, and they had never closed the door. What was
No, they don't
happening?
lock you in.
At the same moment, a nurse
you in
passed
an
by the
insane
room and saw me
asylum?
through the window. I asked her what was going on, but she didn't answer me. She just quickened her pace, seeming to be looking for someone. Soon after, the doors opened and a
doctor.
man and a woman came in.
Okay.
They were not doctors, but they seemed very sympathetic. They asked me to tell them everything that had happened, and I
Why
did.
am I locked in the room?
Soon after, I was discharged from the hospital, but instead of releasing me, they took me somewhere else, promising me answers. And once we got there, I got them. Those two people took me to a mental health institute, where I have
What did
been
I
for
say?
several months. At this point, I have complete control of myself, so I can talk to them just fine, but it is
I
not
guess.
always like that. When I feel well, like now, the doctor tells me things about me. He tells me that I need to know the truth to heal. It all started the day my parents died. I was able to hide from their killers,
That's
but they
far
found
back.
me. They found me and forced me to watch my
Okay.
parents die. As my father bled to death, he
Wow.
crawled towards me and grabbed my face while blood came out of his mouth.
Oh.
Yes, just like Ralph had done to me the day of the accident.
Yeah.
Until that moment I hadn't noticed, but Ralph had my father's face. How could I have forgotten my father's face? I wasn't so
just
little when he was
older,
killed.
you
How could I not have recognized him?
It
My
was
aunt and uncle took care of me
trauma.
as best they could, but I was very upset after that day. Seeing people
Obviously.
near me who weren't there, saying illogical things and having dreams about that night.
You could have just
One day, not
said-
long ago, I ran away. I stole a lot of money from my aunt and uncle and went to live alone in the
That's
apartment
wild.
where everything had happened, which had been abandoned years ago, but my aunt and uncle had the keys. The doctors told me that during those days I survived as best I could, eating out of the garbage and even having money to buy food. There was never a Ralph. I was alone every night, imagining that the house was clean.
Wow.
Imagining that I was going to college and imagining that I had a normal life. During that time, I received different complaints from the neighbors, but none of them dared to talk to me. They were all afraid of me. I survived as best I could until one night I had a much stronger breakout.
You were the
And you know what
teacher.
happened next. Today, I feel that I am recovering. The doctors tell me constantly, but I am not sure. Just as today I may be telling you the true story of what happened to me today,
No,
tomorrow I may
girl.
be trapped in that fantasy again. I am so scared I don't know how conscious I am now. I may not even be here right now. I never did anything bad to anyone. I just want to have a normal life. I want to recover and go back to my aunt and uncle. I don't want this anymore. I don't want this. Henry remained in the psychiatric hospital for another year, when he took his own life in an oversight by the doctors in charge. During that time, his aunt and uncle always visited him, but during the last few months, he no longer responded well to treatment. It is believed that when he took his own life, he was fully conscious.
That doesn't make sense though, because if you are, seeing shit and X, Y, and
It has been
Z,
10
how
years,
can Henry be real?
but the memories of this occurrence remain fresh. In the first year of college, I had a roommate whose name was Jack.
Okay.
He was on a scholarship. He was brilliant, but extremely shy.
It'd be that way.
He hardly talks. Whenever I tried to talk to him, he never spoke up. After a few weeks together, we got to know each other better. He told me a single mom raised him. She later died of a drug overdose when he was 12. He was adopted by an older man who had just lost his family to an accident, and he told me all the man ever did was stare at cars and fix them all day. The man died a few weeks before he came to college. He loved planting, but most of his crops died before they even matured. He always seems to think he is full of bad luck. He was severely bullied in high school and was often called names. Unfortunately, Damon, who attended the same high school with him and was one of his bullies, was also in college with us and also stayed in the same dorm. Damon had a roommate too, Fred. They were typical bad boys. Jack tried his best to avoid Damon, but he couldn't. When Damon found out Jack was in college with him, he started spreading rumors about how his mother died and how poor he was in high school. People started calling him names and teasing him. It was high school all over again for him. He would wake up early to take his bath to avoid coming across anyone. Of course, I would intervene from time to time and threaten to file a complaint if they didn't stop. One time, Jack was in the bathroom when Damon and Fred decided to tease him. They took his towels and clothes and told him to walk back naked to his room. I had to call the dorm supervisor, who came to his rescue.
Okay.
Damon and Fred had gone out to party with their girlfriends one night. Unfortunately, on their way back, they had an accident and no one survived. It was a very tragic incident. The police started investigating the accident. They realized someone had tampered with the car's brakes. It was later discovered that Fred fought with Mike at the party. Mike was a senior. He was very popular and well known for his naughty behaviors. The police arrested Mike for questioning, and the school expelled him immediately because he was already on probation.
That way.
Everyone had forgotten what happened, and we moved on. Up until one night, I woke up suddenly, and everywhere was dark. It came as a shock to me because Jack never sleeps with the light off. I called out his name, but there was no response. I stood up to get the light when I had a spine-tingling feeling as if someone was behind me. I immediately switched on the light, and to my surprise, he was sitting at the edge of his bed. "Were you just behind me, Jack?" I asked. "No," he answered coldly. "Why aren't you sleeping and why was the light off?" He didn't respond. Instead, he laid down and slept. I was a little scared. He mumbled some words, but I couldn't hear him, so I decided to go back to sleep. I closed my eyes for 2 seconds, and Jack switched off the lights again. I quickly switched it back on and told him I needed the light. That night, I didn't sleep much, so I decided to write a complaint letter to the school the following day.
About him?
I wrote about how I thought he needed help. That was the first time he acted weird. I would often catch him talking to himself, hiding things, and one time I saw him cackling. His face was pale as if he hadn't eaten or drank. After I wrote the letter, I decided to return to the dorm early to go through his stuff. I skipped my last class and headed to the dorm. Luckily for me, Jack wasn't at the dorm yet. I started going through his stuff. Then I saw a chronicle and decided to go through it. I stood there frozen, going through the horrible things written in Jack's chronicle.
You trying to get close to read?
He wrote about how he plotted Mike and Fred's fight. He had sent a threatening message to Mike pretending to be Fred. Mike went to confront Fred at the party, and that was how the fight started. He also wrote about how he tampered with the brakes of Fred's car, knowing fully well that Damon would be in the car too. I was engrossed in what I was reading and didn't hear Jack come in. I felt someone behind me, so I turned around. My heart skipped a beat when I realized Jack was behind me.
Duh.
Before I could say anything, he hit me with an iron, and I passed out.
Right in the head.
When I regained
You in the
consciousness,
trunk?
I couldn't see much. It was dark and my hands were tied.
Check for one of them.
Jack had locked me in the trunk of his car.
Levers.
I was shouting for help and struggling. It was getting hard to breathe. I kept asking myself why Jack would do such a thing. It was getting harder and harder to breathe. I kept banging on the car, hoping that someone would hear me. Jack had asked the dorm security for a shovel. He gave it to him, but he was suspicious.
For what?
When Jack got to his car, he opened his trunk, and before I could scream or say anything further, he hit me in the head with the shovel, closed the trunk, and drove off. Thankfully, security had followed Jack quietly, and he saw everything. He reported what he saw to the police. The police alerted every officer on patrol, and they tracked Jack's car. They found the car empty and began to search for me and Jack in the surrounding environment when one officer raised a notice that he had found 2 of my lost bloody teeth in the trunk, and they needed to act fast. They screened and searched the vicinity where he was caught trying to bury me. They searched his late adopted father's garden, and by the time they found me, I was half buried by Jack, who was laughing during the whole incident. I was rushed to the hospital, and he was arrested. Jack was sentenced to life imprisonment. He started his sentence in a mental health facility and was transferred to prison after his treatment was complete. I also saw a therapist for a while because I couldn't get over the fact that Jack had tried to bury me alive. My therapist told me I needed to talk to Jack. So I visited him at the mental asylum.
You need a new therapist.
He didn't answer any of my questions. Instead, he was smiling like a maniac and repeatedly said, "You had to go." When I returned to college, Jack had gotten numerous nicknames. Jack the Psycho Killer, Jack the Human Planter, Jack the Horror Fetish, and Jack the Roommate Who Lost It. These were the few I heard of. These names reminded me of the incident all over again, and I had to ask to leave the room we both stayed in.
That's too much.
During school, people would cluster around me, hoping to hear what I had to say. I dismissed them and told them the rumors and names they called him were what messed with him in the first place. I repeatedly visited the therapist for a while because I couldn't get over the fact that Jack had tried to bury me alive, and I could have been the manure for his garden because he loved to plant and couldn't see another of his newly planted crops die, so I had to go.
Let me know which video was your favorite in the comments. That last one I feel like we've seen before. If you've seen it with us, let us know in the comments. If not, go find it. Until next time, please remember to go and like, comment, subscribe to SSG Animated Videos. And the same here. I love you guys. Bye.